Oh boy. It's been a while since I made one of these videos. It's been a long time coming, and I'm coming back strong, and I'm coming out extremely risky. Now, obviously, this is a topic that is considered super controversial here on the internet. The names alone that are going to be mentioned all throughout this video would probably be enough to put this video and even my channel into like the demonetization category to the point where I might even be shadow banned. But considering what's happening in like many parts of the world, I feel like this video is one of those ones that has a large amounts of importance. Considering that what I'm about to also review had a restricted release due to its subject and narrative, I'm still going to try my best anyways because again, I really do believe that this is really important. In further disclaimer, no, I am not an alt-right or far-right supporter. I am not a big fan of capitalism, and what I'm about to discuss, like I'm not a big fan of it, obviously. And also, I do not believe that the director of the series, Joe Wright, is either, obviously. This video is meant to show us how this dangerous ideology came to be from those who specifically planted the seed back in our world history. And also what this series is trying to show us in terms of the historical subject and also its entertainment factor. Because that's what the series is about. It's not a documentary. But most importantly, alongside all of this, what is this series trying to tell us about our world today? Without further ado, here it is. M, Son of the Century.
Quella di oggi è una data storica. Oggi nasce il fascismo. Una creatura bellissima, fatta di ideali, di cambiamento, che conquisterà milioni di cuori. Sono sicuro anche i vostri. Seguitemi.
Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes of the series that we are about to review, we need to talk about the story's backdrop, aka context. Italy during the 1920s was, to put things very lightly, a mess. In the aftermath of the First World War, political instability and economic hardship ran rampant all over the kingdom. The June 28th, 1919 Treaty of Versailles didn't do the Italians any favors in terms of promised territorial gains, which was one of the foundational premises on why they joined the Entente in 1915, where before they were part of the Triple Alliance. By the war's conclusion, the Kingdom of Italy wasn't able to show any signs of benefits of being on the winning side, which affected the working class peasants very heavily. It is then that we now finally begin the series, first taking place in Milan, on March 23rd, 1919. Now, to just throw this out there, the year 1919 is also quite a mess in many parts of the world. And by this time, from 1919 and 1920, Italy was facing the major social challenge of what is referred to as the Two Red Years. To summarize very briefly, the period between 1919 and 1920 was, well, just characterized by mass strikes and mass worker demonstrations by the socialist groups, as well as self-management experiments through land and factory occupations by the, again, many socialist and also syndicalist groups, which further crippled the already fractured economy and the extremely fragile society. But anywho, in the opening minutes of the show, we get a glimpse of the reoccurring trope that will be played out all through the series, where our main protagonist breaks the fourth wall.
Mi chiamo Mussolini Benito Amilcare Andrea, di Mussolini Alessandro e Maltoni Rosa. Ho 35 anni e dirigo un giornale che io stesso ho fondato.
Yes, our main protagonist is Benito Mussolini. As stated in his very own introduction here in the series, he was a socialist, much like his father Alessandro Mussolini. By this point of his life, however, he is running a newspaper called Il Popolo d'Italia, which was founded by Mussolini himself when he was still part of the Socialist Party, or PSI. Interestingly enough, the newspaper first began as a pro-war nationalist newspaper in 1914, which advocated for Italy's entry into World War I, which the vast majority of the socialists did not advocate for. This was one of the main reasons that led to his expulsion from the party altogether. Now, the event that is being held and that is being shown to you guys on screen right now is the founding of the Fasci Italiani di Combattimento. I should warn you guys, I'm very, very sorry if I butchered all of the Italian names here. Now, when translated into English, it is simply known as the Italian Fighting Bands. The group was an ultranationalist organization that intended to appeal to war veterans who served in the war from all across the political spectrum, where at first the organization had no political orientation, just simply wished to accommodate the war veterans that felt just alienated from Italian society in the aftermath of everything. And from the opening scene, you can really see and understand why these men joined the organization in the first place. All of them got no pension, no jobs, and in turn, nowhere else to go. These groups of men would be commonly known as the black shirts, due to the black uniforms that they would wear. In many points of the series, we would see a common tactic that would be committed by the black shirt groups. Anywhere they go, basically, if they see or hear any socialists or even suspected ones, well, they would go around and beat, kill, and even torture them. They would break into factories, compounds that are occupied by the socialists, and also raid the printing services for the socialist newspaper titled Avati. And in many cases, law enforcement officers who would be present in all of this would just end up turning a blind eye. The reason for this was because the Italian government by this time was in opposition to the socialist movement, especially those who are around the center-right to liberal side of the political spectrum, which made them hesitant to intervene in the violence, and in some parts of the country, it would effectively fall under fascist control due to the lack of resistance. We are also introduced to Mussolini's right-hand man in the series, Cesare Rossi, who's nicknamed Cesarino. And much like Mussolini, Cesarino began his political career as a member of the Socialist Party, which would then have him later become estranged from the ideology of socialism, to which in turn he would leave the party altogether alongside Mussolini to help run his newspaper. After which, he assisted in emboldening the fascist ideology by becoming a leading writer in Mussolini's newspaper. Alongside him, we are also introduced to Margherita Sarfatti, commonly referred to as the Jewish mother of fascism. Now, I know it sounds absolutely insane that a Jew is referred to as such, right? But it should be made clear at this very point in history, even though that it sounds very, very, very sus of me to say this, but literally, just work with me here, but literally, in this very point in history, when fascism was at its infancy, like, you know, before the before the funny Austrian man with a funny mustache came around, the fascist circle was still open to Jews, and it wasn't really anti-Semitic, at least just yet, obviously. In Sarfati's early political career, she was working as an art critic under the socialist newspaper Avati, which was headed by Mussolini at the time before his expulsion. When Mussolini later found himself estranged from the socialists and in turn the party again, Sarfati became his mistress, either to advance her own political career through a gamble or to get away from her husband, or more realistically both. But honestly, we can't say for sure. But this isn't the first time that Mussolini would have a mistress in his life. Also, by the way, I know that this is the first episode, but trust me, many of these figures that have been introduced have a lot of importance, so I hope you guys can bear with me. Until I forget them, because they later become irrelevant in the series, but moving on. The next individual we are introduced to by a letter sent to Mussolini this time is Gabriele D'Annunzio.
Gabriele D'Annunzio, grande poeta, edonista, esteta raffinato, seduttore trionfale, asso dei cieli ed eroe di guerra. L'italiano vivente più famoso al mondo. E come si fa a non ammirarlo? È un superuomo. Uno che in piena guerra è volato su Vienna bombardandola con volantini tricolori. E cosa fa ora il superuomo? Va a Fiume.
As said, he was a poet and a fighter pilot. D'Annunzio was in command of the 87th Fighter Squadron, where he organized 9 planes in a 700-mile round trip to drop propaganda leaflets over Vienna. And due to his traits as a poet and his very own natural charisma, he was able to portray himself very highly, and in turn, he was seen as a war hero in the aftermath of the war. In the letter that was sent to Mussolini, D'Annunzio informed that he would take, quote, Fiume by military force. By the end of World War I, in the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, the massive gains of territory that the Kingdom of Italy was seeking didn't come to fruition, as said before, with the city of Fiume being one of them. Instead of it having it go towards the Italians, it instead became part of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. D'Annunzio, being an ultranationalist, was angered by what he considered to be the surrender of an Italian city. It was then, on the 12th of September 1919, D'Annunzio led a force of 186 so-called, quote, legionaries from Rosny in Italy that would march all the way to Fiume, which was composed over 2,000 troops that was made up of former royal guards and veterans of the war. By then, the force was successful in seizing control of the city and forcing the withdrawal of Allied occupying forces. The March to Fiume became known as the Impresa di Fiume, also known as the Fiume Endeavor or the Fiume Enterprise when translated to English. And as portrayed, Mussolini had somewhat of a mixed set of feelings when it came to D'Annunzio. To put it simply, he was quite jealous of him. However, there were some things that Mussolini respected about him. When D'Annunzio first took over Fiume, he began to set up an Italian regency in the region, which would be later known as the Italian Regency of Carnaro. The regency would then have its own constitution, government, and judiciary, with Fiume serving as its capital city, and D'Annunzio being its head of state, and in turn, he would give himself the title of Duce. In the business, we call this foreshadowing. Also, there is something that I kind of have to point out here at this point in the video, because I know if I don't, I might regret it a lot later when I post it, and also people might point it out to me and start asking questions on like why I haven't pointed it out, so here we go. Now, in the series, there is, this scenes or so.
Dottore, c'è un samurai per lei.
So now, I know you guys might seem a bit dumbfounded by the random, well, katana-wielding Japanese guy in some of these scenes, and trust me, I was as well, because I thought that this was super random, but surprisingly, this, well, samurai was an actual Japanese ally and friend of Dianonzo. His name was Harukichi Simoe, and much like Dianonzo, he was a poet and a writer. By this time, he had already been living in Italy for several years, working both as a translator and a promoter of cultural exchanges between Italy and Japan. And also, he would teach karate and judo to the Italians as well. When he accompanied Dianonzo in his endeavors and also his eventual occupation and ruling over the regency of Carnaro, he was given the nickname of Comrade Samurai. I know, very on the nose. It's not me, it's them, okay? So don't cancel me for it. Cancel me something, whatever. Now, moving on from that little tangent. After airing his grievances, Mussolini then decided to make a daring gamble to fly over to Fiume to meet up with Dianonzo to help mobilize the black shirts in the build-up to the general election on November 16th, 1919. Now, it was true that the black shirts voted and participated in this very election and would eventually lose said election. But the plan and action of Mussolini personally flying towards Fiume to meet up with Dianonzo is not true. While it was true that both men met each other personally, that was only after the Italian regency of Carnaro was fully dissolved and when Dianonzo left Fiume. As for Mussolini personally flying a plane, it is hard to say if he actually knew how to flew or even sustain an injury on learning how to fly himself. However, what I can say for certain is that Mussolini used the image of an aviator and a pilot to further push his propaganda. So while the scene of Mussolini giving his speech in a pilot suit may seemingly not be true, it is historically authentic. Afterwards, in the following scenes, it portrays the Blackshirts' loss in the general elections of November 16th, 1919, which ended with a majority victory in favor of the Socialist Party, with the fascist Blackshirts gaining 0 seats. Now, in the next scene, we see Mussolini get arrested and thrown in prison, which really didn't happen in this time. Mussolini did get arrested many, many times, but those were all before his political career ever started. As a matter of fact, the only times that I could find where he faced any sort of arrest or charge were all outside of Italy, where he was arrested twice in Switzerland in 1903 and in 1904. But as he sat inside the prison in the show, we then see the socialists staging a walkout before King Victor Emmanuel III would give his speech to open Parliament. Now, I could not find any information about the Socialist Party staging a walkout of Parliament before it opens, but the socialists themselves were anti-monarchists and advocated for an Italian republic, so stuff like this wouldn't really be out of the question. In the aftermath of the election, the black shirts and the newspaper under Mussolini lost a lot of their momentum and also started to lose a lot of money. However, when the Socialist Party won, let's just say that people around the country weren't exactly too fond of them. Most especially, and most obviously, the business class, aka the rich folks and the oligarchs. This then led to some of them, high likely private landowners, to help provide funding to Mussolini and the black shirts due to their anti-socialist stance and their willingness to put it lightly, to deal with the problem. With now the big bucks coming in, the newspaper started to grow more thanks to, well, the funding. It was also thanks to the growing public distaste for the still existing problem of the mass strikes and occupations of factories that the newspaper itself started to grow a lot more, and in turn, bring in a lot more revenue. Now, with the much larger quantity of money going into Mussolini's own machine, more and more people obviously started to join its base. Then, suddenly, there was some major news. Overwhelmed with the still ongoing crisis, Francesco Saverino Nitti, who was serving as the prime minister, resigned. And in turn, a political heavyweight took his place.
L'onorevole Giovanni Giolitti. Io non ho paura di niente e di nessuno. Fermerò ogni violenza da qualunque parte provenga. Socialisti, fascisti. Non guarderò in faccia a nessuno. L'ordine verrà ristabilito.
80 anni, deputato da sempre, 5 volte capo del governo. Giolitti non è un vile come Nitti.
Just to give the most basic TLDR summary, Prime Minister Giolitti is one seasoned veteran politician. He first served in October 1848, and now with him being chosen to serve again, this would be now his 5th term in office. Yeah, let's just say that this man does not know what retirement is. Initially, Giolitti's stances and actions against the strikes were working, which garnered him an immense amount of support and also crippled the socialists in terms of their organizations of strikes and factory occupation. He was even able to reach an agreement with the Kingdom of Yugoslavia in regards to, well, the Fiume problem. Both countries ended up signing the Treaty of Rapallo on the 12th of November 1920, where both sides agreed that Fiume should instead become a free, independent state. The only problem was the former leader now, as he is pretty much referred to now since the regency is over, D'Annunzio just ignored it. He simply ignored the treaty, which led to D'Annunzio himself declaring war on Italy itself. In response, on the 24th of December 1920, Giolitti sent the Italian Royal Army to Fiume and ordered the Regina Marina to bombard the city. And as a result, these forces, a lot of those who were occupying Fiume, specifically the legionaries, to evacuate and soon after surrender the city. Then, to capitalize on his successes, Giolitti announced for new elections to be held on May 1921, which Mussolini and the fascists hopped in to participate. Only this time, Mussolini decided to align himself and his group with Giolitti to get themselves into government a bit more easily. Now, Giolitti unfortunately was placed in a very, very difficult situation right from the very start when his tenure began. He wanted to make sure that the strikes and support for the socialists completely stopped. Alongside this, he also wanted to end the violence that was being committed both by the socialists and also the fascists. But that also meant that if he took extensive action to end the said violence, specifically ending the violence that are being committed by the fascists, then that would cripple his own support. So, when Mussolini made the deal to join the Conservative National Bloc, or BN, Giolitti essentially just had no choice but to accept their offer in the hopes of gaining a majority win in the elections. But by the end of said elections, he was unable to do so. On the other side, the fascists were able to obtain 35 seats, with Mussolini himself being elected to parliament for the very first time. But, again, since Giolitti wasn't able to gain a majority, his coalition weren't able to govern correctly. So, as a result, he ended up stepping down and resigned after the fascists withdrew their support. Now, just to give a backdrop, Giolitti's fifth time in office only lasted barely a year, whilst his predecessor, Nitti, only lasted 19 days. So you can just truly see how much of a crisis Italy was politically. With Giolitti's resignation, he was then succeeded by Ivano Bonomi, who wasn't named in the series but was shown very, very briefly. And honestly, I don't blame the filmmakers for this because Bonomi and his government only lasted 7 months. In turn, Mussolini decided to shift his entire political focus. Considering the amount of political momentum he started to gain, he decided to finally try and put an end to the violence. This was to look more appealing not only to the public as a genuine political group, but also to look tolerable to the political elites to help negotiate more seats for his own party. As a result, Mussolini decided to enter into a peace agreement with the socialists, which obviously pissed off a lot of the other fascist leaders. It was then, following negotiations between both sides, on either August 2nd or August 3rd, 1921, that Mussolini and other supporting fascist leaders went to Rome and signed the Pact of Pacification with the Socialist Party PSI and the General Confederation of Labor. As for the rest of the black shirts, they've just outright ignored and opposed the pact, with posters in Bologna even pressing against Mussolini, calling him a traitor. And in response, actually, Mussolini ended up resigning from the executive group of the Central Committee of his party on the 18th of August, 1921. And this wasn't really portrayed in the show. In a statement, he said, quote, "If fascism doesn't follow me in collaboration with the socialists, at least no one can force me to follow fascism." However, the Fascist National Council ended up rejecting his resignation due to many of Mussolini's rivals simply being too inexperienced in politics. Basically, they really didn't know what they would do without Mussolini. What was shown in the series, though not really all laid out for us due to how extremely brief it was that there was a meeting with some of the fascist leaders on D'Annunzio to potentially take over Mussolini's position if he ought to resign. But in response, D'Annunzio said that he had to first consult the stars of the night sky. Basically, a no answer. Now, fast forward to November 7 to 10, 1921, the Third Fascist Congress was being held in Rome. Over these few days, several meetings were to be held between all of the leaders of the group, but in the show, seemingly only one of these meetings was held, whilst for the majority of the scene shows Mussolini giving a speech to an erratic crowd of supporters. It was in this gathering in the Congress, Mussolini had essentially changed up his tone, where he denounced the peace pact with the socialists. In turn, the fascist members, who were all present, decided to fully transition from the Italian fighting bands to the National Fascist Party, or PNF. When the PNF was proclaimed, the party was officially a group that was not based on a coalition of labor syndicates, but on an association of the fasci and their storm squads.
Un partito così saldamente inquadrato e disciplinato da potersi tramutare in un esercito capace di agire sul terreno della violenza.
Basically, this was a political party that could easily turn into a private army, according to the words of Mussolini. Shortly after, in this part of the show, in episode 3, we are introduced to Mussolini's staunchest opponent yet.
Giacomo Matteotti, il socialista impellicciato, famiglia ricchissima. E lui cosa fa? Si mette dalla parte dei contadini, della povera gente. Non vada a lavorare la terra invece che rompermi i coglioni a me.
As said, Matteotti was born into a wealthy family. But as he grew up and graduated from the University of Bologna, Matteotti began to support many socialist ideals, to which he joined the Socialist PSI party and was extremely critical of Italy joining World War I. We see Matteotti vocally denouncing the violence committed by the black shirts. I could not specifically pinpoint on the date this was, or if this specific speech really did happen. However, in 1921, Matteotti, he ended up denouncing fascist violence in a pamphlet titled... Okay, I'm just going to read the English translation. The pamphlet, when translated into English, was titled Socialist Inquiry on the Deeds of the Fascists in Italy. Though, considering how extremely vocal Matteotti was, it is possible that he confronted Mussolini and the other fascist members personally in Parliament.
In Italia il potere è in mano ad associazioni terroristiche, ad organizzazioni criminali, ad assassini professionisti!
Another scene of violence carried out by the fascists was when the news of one of its members, Federico Guillermo Florio, was murdered by a communist. This then triggered 2 days of full violent outrage by the black shirts. Now, in the show, I couldn't specifically pinpoint if the fascist leader, Italo Balbo, took part in the violence itself. But it's not out of the question if he did, since many of the black shirts members were indeed violent. Obviously. By the end of the 2 days, the news started to spread fast, which wasn't a good look for Mussolini, and people started to grow weary. In retaliation, mass strikes were held against them, which started to put pressure on the government and the king. Though, in turn, the strikes dealt the opposite. It indeed pressured the Italian government heavily. However, at the same time, the politicians and the king were just getting really, really tired by this point. So, in response, King Victor Emmanuel III ordered another government to be formed without the Socialist Party. By this time, the current prime minister after Bonamise's resignation is Luigi Facta, and he would become the last prime minister before Mussolini's dictatorship. And let's just say, much like his many predecessors, he will be having a very, very, very tough time in office. It is then where we cut to Mussolini giving a speech in the San Carlo Theater in Naples on October 24, 1922. As accurately as portrayed, he made the declaration that fascism must become the state. It is this very speech that becomes the catalyst for the infamous event of Mussolini's March on Rome.
Amici nere, o ci daranno il governo o ce lo prenderemo calando su Roma!
After several meetings and careful planning, on October 26, 1922, Mussolini and the Black Shirts began to move towards Rome, as he gave the order for the quadrumvirs. Sorry if I butchered that. The quadrumvirs is basically Mussolini's version of the triumvirate, but instead of having 3 members, it has 4, hence the name. These members were Emilio De Bono, Italo Balbo, Michele Binacci, and Cesare Maria da Vinci. Again, sorry if I'm fucking butchered the names. All of these 4 members were to head the march towards Rome. Meanwhile, Mussolini instead went to Milan and didn't participate in the march itself. Instead, he stayed at his newspaper headquarters that was located there in Milan. So all of the pictures and photographs you all see of Mussolini side by side with the quadrumvirs and the Black Shirts are simply propaganda pictures that were taken before or after the March on Rome. Once the word began to spread of a potential insurrection and the Black Shirts slowly gathering around the outskirts of the city, Prime Minister Facta mobilized the army. But there was just one problem. In order to fully suppress and squash this potential insurrection, a state of emergency had to be declared. But a military order had to be signed by the king. So, when Facta spoke with the king and insisted on signing the order of declaring a state of emergency to help quell this fascist insurrection, King Victor Emmanuel III just refused. In the show, it was portrayed that the king ended up not signing the order because he ended up spilling ink all over the paper due to nervousness. And seemingly, his servants were unable to obtain another copy. But in real life, we actually cannot specify the reason why the king refused to sign the order. Every time Facta was asked about it, he'd refuse to give an explanation. By the end of it all, on October 30, the king capitulated and decided to hand over the reins of government to Mussolini and the fascist PNF, making Mussolini himself the new Prime Minister of Italy.
La democrazia sopravvive per mia gentile concessione. Per ora. Vedete di fare I bravi.
Once Mussolini became prime minister, he did not waste any time in making his most loyal followers high-ranking ministers. One big problem, however, that was plaguing him was the lack of a controlling majority in parliament. When Mussolini and the PNF took over, they still had to form a coalition with 4 other parties, since they only had 35 deputies in parliament and 10 nationalist allies. So, just to give the most basic breakdown on how coalition works, if the winning political party did not obtain a majority of seats in a parliamentary system, they either have to have a partnership with other political parties to help them reach a majority, or have a minority government. The only condition about having a coalition is that you have to negotiate with your coalition partners on every single piece of legislation that would be proposed, and has to be all approved by all members of the coalition. And you can already guess, Mussolini is not up for any form of negotiations. One of his first acts as prime minister was to pass a new electoral law. The purpose of this law was to change the voting system from proportional representation to a system that would allow Mussolini to have a clear majority. Under the law's terms, it states, the party gaining the largest share of votes, provided that they had gained at least 25% of the vote, gained 2/3 of the seats in parliament. Yeah, it sounds bullshit, I know. Obviously, this did not go down well with the parliamentary deputies. One of them was from Mussolini's own coalition, Luigi Sturzo, from the Italian People's Party. Sturzo was a devoted Catholic priest who served in parliament, and the People's Party, or the PPI, was formed with the permission of the Pope to represent the Church's interests in politics. Despite being in a coalition with Mussolini, Sturzo was a committed anti-fascist, and refused to help Mussolini pass the new electoral law. In retaliation, it's shown that Sturzo was hunted down and murdered by Mussolini's black shirts. At least this is what is at first portrayed in the show. However, in the next episode, we find out that it wasn't Sturzo who was murdered. We find out that the priest that they murdered was Giovanni Minzoni, and much like Sturzo, he was an anti-fascist and a member of the PPI. Though once Sturzo and the rest of the PPI was out of the picture after immense pressure from the black shirts, the new electoral law was finally passed.
Il silenzio. Eminenza, questo silenzio della Chiesa ammazza di più delle bastonate di Mussolini.
It is then we fast forward to 1923. Now, the opening speech in episode 6 that was shown didn't happen. However, the outfits and uniforms that Mussolini and the fascist leaders are wearing are very, very accurate. Not to mention the setting of where the speech is being held on a balcony. Now, this episode, we see one of the current problems to the PNF, or the National Fascist Party. When the party was first formed, like I mentioned earlier in this video, and as portrayed in the show, the party was meant to be made up of disciplined men that could act as a private army to the political party. But as we see in a birthday party for Mussolini, pretty much all of them are getting plastered drunk, doing pony ride races, and whatever the fuck frat boys do, I guess. Obviously, Mussolini was pissed off about this, to which he blamed Balbo for, since he was appointed as the malicious commanding general. Now, I have to give an unfortunate piece here, which would make me sound like a supporter of these fuckers. But no, I'm not, okay? I'm not. I just wanted to replay that clip, okay? I am not. The black shirts inherently were not this rowdy and undisciplined. But it is true that there are some parts within the party and the movement that shows such. But for the most part, they were well organized, and that's what made them terrifyingly effective and the main advantage that they had when they rose to power. It is later that we see Mussolini meeting with his mistress Margherita Sarfatti after he received the news about the death of her husband, Cesare Sarfatti. Unfortunately, I couldn't really find the cause of her husband's death, but after he died, Margherita would later move to Rome. The only thing that's inaccurate here is the perceived timeline that's being portrayed in the show, where in this episode, we're given the impression that the death of Cesare Sarfatti happened in 1923, but in real history, it happened in 1924. It is then that we see the high-ranking fascist leaders bickering and going after each other's feelings until Cesare Forni broke it up with his yelling. He then said to his fellow members that the party has started to become petty and shameless, to which he stormed out of the office and said that this wasn't the party he first joined. When Mussolini confronted and tried to calm him down in the show, Forni said that he would present his own list of fascist candidates for the up-and-coming general elections in 1924. Though the portrayal, it leads us to believe that it was because he had grown dissident with the party. In reality, he was outright expelled for reasons I unfortunately could not find. In response, Mussolini ordered Amerigo Dumini, who was appointed as head of the Cheka, which was the Black Shirts' secret police, to deal with Forni. It was then, on the 12th of March 1924, Forni was attacked at the Milan Central Station. In the show, it's pretty much shown that Forni was beaten to death, though in reality, there is a lot of conflicting information about what actually happened to him when he was actually attacked in the station. Though it is clear that he was fully just taken out of the picture by this point. Later on, the 1924 general elections were held, and by the end of it, the fascists won the election by a landslide. And it is thanks to the new electoral law, to which they were able to gain a substantial majority. And by substantial, I mean about over 60% of parliamentary seats. Again, I know, the electoral law that Mussolini passed was bullshit. And you can tell why it is bullshit. In the second to last episode, we see Mussolini receiving the collar of the Supreme Order of the Most Holy Annunciation, which is the highest order of knighthood in the Kingdom of Italy before it would later be discontinued in 1946 when Italy became a republic after the Second World War. Some of its most notable recipients were King George V of the UK and Simeon II, the last Tsar of Bulgaria, with some of its most infamous being Philip Landgrave and Prince of Hesse and Hermann Göring. Yes, that Hermann Göring. And now, Mussolini is included, of course. Now, it is true that King Victor Emmanuel III knighted Mussolini, but this shit about Mussolini saying he'll become the king's cousin once he receives the order is just plain old bullcrap. Sorry, but that's just not how knighthood works. Once the new fascist government got to work, many political leaders, including Matteotti, began to contest the results of the election. Matteotti, of course, was the most vocal. We see in the show that he pressed the fascists directly, calling out their blatant tactics of violence and intimidation. During the election, there were almost endless instances of black shirts going to polling stations and intimidating both voters and opposition candidates, which essentially made the election unfair and pretty much illegitimate. This speech was given on the 30th of May, 1924. It is much, much longer than what is portrayed in the show, for reasons of pacing, obviously. What's really great about this scene, where Matteotti tried to give his statement about the election, many of the fascist party members began rushing at him to try to shut him up. Now, obviously, this doesn't sound like much, but what made this scene significant is showing how powerless the opposition had become, and in turn, how powerless and fragile democracy had become. This is encapsulated when the speaker said to Matteotti,
Onorevole Matteotti, continui ma prudentemente. Io chiedo di parlare non prudentemente o imprudentemente, ma parlamentarmente.
In the end, this sealed his fate.
Il mio discorso l'ho fatto. Ora voi preparatemi un'orazione funebre.
What's also shown in the series is Matteotti's own book, which is titled The Fascisti Expose, A Year of Fascist Domination. This book is a compilation of Matteotti's speeches against the fascists and Mussolini, and also includes reports or chronicle of deeds where it lists out the day-by-day details of political violence carried out by the black shirts, or also known as the squadristi in many parts of the Italian country. What also shook Mussolini was his alleged acceptance of bribes from Sinclair Oil. Now, in the show, the oil company wasn't named outright, but I am most certain that this is what is being portrayed here. Now, according to the Italian historian Renzo De Flecce, in an essay, he claims that Matteotti publicly condemned the alliance of the socialist trade unions and the fascist counterpart, and that Matteotti found actual evidence of this. And beyond all of this is pretty much up to theoretical speculation, but in my opinion, Matteotti was gonna publicly go forward with the evidence to damage Mussolini's credibility. Whatever it was, the ending was the same. On June 10th, 1924, as Matteotti was on his routine walk on the way to Parliament, 5 men who were acting members of Mussolini's secret police kidnapped Matteotti and restrained him inside a rented car. They then drove outside of Rome as Matteotti struggled to escape. But it was no use. Matteotti was stabbed several times till he died. His body was then hastily buried in a forest near Riano. News quickly spread of Matteotti's disappearance. Public outrage against the fascists and Mussolini began to spread, which, of course, ended up pouring into Parliament. Mussolini then lied to Parliament and the deputies that he would investigate the, quote, mysterious disappearance of Matteotti, which all political opposition parties didn't buy. It was then that all opposition parties united and agreed to abandon all parliamentary proceedings until the government had clarified on what did actually happen to Matteotti. And this whole entire event is what would become known as the Aventino Secession. This was an attempt to lend strength to the, quote, moral question that would highlight public disapproval of fascism, while also putting pressure on the king to dismiss Mussolini as prime minister, and in turn, have the government dissolved. The problem was, despite the massive public outrage, King Victor Emmanuel III refused to act. Since the fascist government had the seats by a large majority and almost all of the Senate in the entirety of the kingdom. Even though in the show he tried pressing Mussolini to act for the sake of quelling the political crisis, in reality, the king really couldn't do anything. Many of the opposing forces in parliament were now basically powerless, and the Aventino secession was ineffective in keeping public opinion aroused, and it just all failed to take decisive action against Mussolini. Despite the heavy pressure, Mussolini still didn't take much action and would distance himself from the murder. When those who were responsible for Matteotti's murder were finally arrested by the police, which included Dumini, he named Cesare Rossi, aka Cesarino, as one who gave the order to kill Matteotti, which is portrayed in the show. The accusation made Mussolini extremely paranoid, which led to the eventual split between both him and Rossi. When Rossi was named as the one who was responsible in giving the order, he went into hiding. As he laid low, he sent a letter to Mussolini. In the letter, he pressed on what he called a sudden ambush, referring to Dumini dropping his name as the perpetrator of the Matteotti murder, which he added was organized by Emilio de Bono, who was acting under Mussolini's orders. He then further pressed that the actions he committed all throughout his political career under Mussolini were by his very orders, referring to Mussolini, both governmental and illegal ones, many of which were written out in the letter. It is suspected that Rossi was planning to go public with this to the press, but Mussolini ordered his blackshirts to hunt him down, which made Rossi flee Italy to France and later to Switzerland. And just so you thought it couldn't get any more challenging for Mussolini, well, it did. Some of the most extreme and radical members, specifically from the squadristi wing of the fascist party, started to become very furious about Mussolini's lack of response that were being thrown against him in regards to the Matteotti murder, which was exacerbated when his body was later discovered on August 16th, 1924, 66 days after he was killed. The lack of response made these radical members see Mussolini as a coward, and that his cowardness could be potentially fatal to the fascist government. This eventually led to these radicals confronting Mussolini and threatening him with a potential coup in the autumn of 1924. Besides their reasons for viewing Mussolini as a coward, the other reasons they threatened him were that they wanted to conduct a second fascist revolution to clean up house. When Mussolini, quote unquote, normalized the fascist movement to become a genuine political party, these radicals felt betrayed because they viewed squadristi-led violence as the true soul of the fascist ideology. Once they had said their warning, Mussolini truly now had his back against the wall. And it is then we not only get the most accurate scene by far in the series, but also the most crucial scene. Now, what we are about to see is the very moment when democracy in Italy died, and the beginning of Mussolini's fascist dictatorship. On the 3rd of January 1925, with pressure mounting from both political opposition and from his own party, Mussolini walked into the Chamber of Deputies and gave a speech that was seen as his start of cementing his firm grip on power. Despite the speech itself being heavily shortened and condensed, many of the lines that were spoken in the show are actual excerpts from the official transcript. He first opened by stating that the speech he was about to give wasn't a parliamentary one, but instead an indictment. An indictment against himself. In the speech, he made it clear to everyone present that he was indeed responsible for all of the actions that were committed by the black shirts, to which he dared his opponents, both anti-fascists and even those within his own party, within the chamber, to remove him from power.
Ora tocca a loro. L'articolo 47 dello Statuto dice: la Camera dei Deputati ha il diritto di accusare i ministri del Re e di tradurli di fronte all'Alta Corte di Giustizia. Domando formalmente se in questa Camera o fuori di questa Camera ci sia qualcuno che si voglia avvalere dell'articolo 47. Basta che uno di voi ne faccia richiesta. Solo uno. Ed il sottoscritto sarà finito per sempre.
However, no one within the chamber dared to move against him. All of the deputies were, by this point, too afraid to oppose Mussolini. With their silence, democracy in Italy didn't die in a bloody struggle, but it died in dead silence.
Silenzio.
And that's the whole series. Now, I know I wasn't able to touch on everything that the series had to show, such as Mussolini's relationship with his wife and children, and his other mistresses, besides Sarfatti. This is because I kind of found these parts irrelevant to the main topic of what the series was predominantly about, showcasing how Mussolini rose to power with the new dangerous ideology of fascism. Joe Wright, by all means, did a really, really great job in his portrayal of the many events that were shown in the series. Not to mention how amazing the actors were on how they handled their roles. Even down to the supporting actors. They've essentially brought their A game to give their characters a great amount of substance. Now, of course, since this is a series and not a documentary, everything that was showcased wasn't entirely accurate. Many of the major inaccuracies that I have pointed out purely just didn't happen at all in the first place, but they still remained historically authentic. Another main reason why it wasn't entirely accurate was that the series itself was based on a prize-winning novel of the same name, which was written by Antonio Scurati, a writer and an academic. As one reviewer, Jack Saley, put it, quote, "a brilliantly performed portrait of a pathetic monster," which I heavily agree with. Luca Marinelli, who played Mussolini, did a brilliant job. And overall, this whole entire series was just a sight to behold. And it is truly a shame that not many people outside of Europe will be able to see it due to its restricted release. But for those who wish to now watch it, thanks to this review, I really do hope you found it as captivating as I did. Now, as you guys can tell, there is still some time left in this video. However, for everyone who's only interested in the review that I made, you guys can click off the video now. As for those who haven't, however, I'll be warning you that this part of the video will be containing a lot of modern politics that are currently ongoing and in certain parts of the world, which, if you're not interested in or it's potentially triggering for you, then I suggest that you also click off this video as well. But for those who decided to stick around Hopefully you are all very understanding and could see the bigger picture past my own opinions. Of course, this part of the video will be heavily opinionated, for one, which I'd sound hypocritical in the end, maybe, but but the main point of this video is to explain the whats and the whys on why I believe this series is both important for us not only to watch, but also to understand. Specifically, what I believe and what the main intentions of the series in terms of what it is telling us about our politics today.
Will become the 47th president.
History as our Independence Day.
What do we want? A people's vote! When do we want it?
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
במבצע, לא בסבבים, במלחמה.
We're saved by God to make America great again. I believe that.
It's okay to be proud to be German.
Led by activist Tommy Robinson.
So I just want to point out that I'm no stranger in making like heavily opinionated videos when it comes to politics here on this channel. I have by now already made like a few, and I'll say full-heartedly those videos didn't really do well in terms of view count and reception. Also, I'm no stranger to hate either. Even before I started posting on this channel, I was already like relatively active in a lot of online discourse on certain political topics. Politics have unfortunately become part of the For You page of mine ever since I was around like 14 or 15 years old. By that time, I do not have the same opinions I have today, obviously. And as a matter of fact, if I were to like listen to my younger self today, I would heavily disagree with little old Eddie. And this was mainly because when I was younger, I had relatively conservative views. But obviously, again, I was a kid. I didn't know shit about politics back then, alright? So don't go after me because of, like, views that I used to have when I was, like, a young teenager. I'm not gonna go into, like, a full-on rant on how I changed my political views and my beliefs in this video, because this video is already, like, fucking long enough, and I'm probably procrastinating on editing this potential behemoth of a video. Get to fucking editing, future me, huh? So, to keep it short, the main turning point for me was my growing interest in history. I went to college to study history when I finally entered college, thankfully, and eventually, by the end of it all, I was able to graduate. I now have a bachelor major in history, very recently too, as I'm writing and recording this video. Yay. I spent way too much money in that college, man. And within essentially around this time, that's when my political thoughts and opinions became what they are today. Right now, I'm practically a left-wing, social democrat, progressive, or, I don't know, woke radical if you're, I don't know, a hate watcher or one of those types of people who think that immigrants are like the causes of all your life's problems and the country's problems and that transgendered people don't exist. Anyways, speaking of immigration, oh man, dear lord, this is where it'll just go off the rails now. This is where it's just going to go off the rails now. So, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this review, or like at the very beginning of this video, the series had a restricted release when it was first premiered in the Venice Film Festival in 2025. it would first aired in Europe, since, well, obviously the production and the director are, well, Europeans. Also, I know by me saying that Joe Wright is European is going to make Brexiteers angry. But to be honest, I don't really care. Then, afterwards, it would be aired to the rest of the world. In Latin America, India, and even as far as New Zealand. However, the one place where the series failed to air due to its subject was the United States. In particular, pretty much all of the major streaming platforms like Netflix, HBO Max, had pretty much avoided it altogether. And it was due to its anti-fascist rhetoric and message being, quote, too controversial. Now, I know what you may be thinking. Well, hang on. Wait, hang on a minute. Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Too controversial in being too anti-fascist? Isn't fascism bad? Well, obviously, yes. Yes, it is. It is bad. I mean, for fuck's sake, do I need to, like, spell it out for you for what fascism has done in our world history? Like, do I need to do that for you? Now, before I answer as to why this was the particular reasoning, there is another argument on the other side that was made by many critics, and they have argued that whilst the series does criticize fascism, these critics' problem was due to the series' aesthetic. Specifically, when a violent scene is played out in front of you, it looks intoxicating. Another is the constant trope of having the character of Mussolini breaking the fourth wall, which adds like another layer of seduction to, you know, have the audience be enticed to support him. And honestly, that's a really fair critique. It's a really fair critique in the end. Like, I'll say this as well. I've fallen for, like, this fucking trope many, many times. There are moments where you just get so attached to, like, the screen that I'd get into, like, a state of mind of pretty much, like, almost being captivated by all of the violence that are being played out right in front of me. But then, when those scenes enter into, like, a crescendo moment, until it, like, finally stops, and returns to, like, a sense of calm, in the series' case, the sense of calm being, scolding arguments and yelling of each other and more political rants, you'll slowly begin to, like, snap out of it, and you begin to doubt and question yourself on why you felt the way you felt when watching those particular scenes. For the weak-minded person who unfortunately doesn't have the ability to question themselves, they would find the captivation and aesthetics attractive, which would make them actively support the violent actions that are being played out in front of them, and also support a lot of the harmful rhetoric and the harmful choices that are being portrayed on screen. However, for people who do have the ability to question or even second guess themselves, they would now start to understand why so many people would fall for such hateful ideologies such as fascism. Joe Wright, the director, would say it himself in an interview with The Guardian, saying, quote, "I want the audience to be seduced so that we could understand how he seduced Italy, and in fact, many world leaders as well." So, for those who have those criticisms of the aesthetics being a glorification of Mussolini and fascism are either missing the point of what the series is about or have widely different interpretations. And to be fair to them, all those criticisms are valid. This aesthetic choice, however, was the aim of the series to, again, give the audience a scope as to why all of us, even myself, would fall for this shit. The aim of the series wasn't meant to glorify what's being shown, but it's to showcase how fascism draws you in to supporting it and being emboldened by it in the end. And the way that Wright does this, if we were to use like language of like filmmaking, was through the use of the Brechtian technique, or Brechtian technique. The use of Brechtian technique. Sorry, I didn't take filmmaking when I was in college, alright? I'm sorry. Now, the Brechtian techniques includes the obvious trope of the character breaking the fourth wall, obviously, but also the usage of the alienation effect, and also the use of harsh lighting, aka flashing lights that could just give you guys epilepsy. It's really made to disrupt the audience's emotional involvement when they watch the series. And by the end of all of those scenes, your mind starts to critically think in the end. Because Wright wanted the audience to first emphasize. He wanted the audience to emphasize first with Mussolini as he seduces you, to then suddenly pull out the rug all below you. It makes you feel complicit at first, and then it forces you to judge the actions that are being portrayed, drawing the attention just how easily democratic values can be easily eroded.
We won! I will declare a national emergency at our southern border.
China, 67%. European Union, 39%.
Of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came.
A wave of disappointment.
Taiwan, 64%. We're going to charge them 32%. Japan, 46%. They would charge us 46%. India, very, very tough. Very, very tough.
Wall Street experienced the worst day since 2020.
You're looking at Los Angeles. Demonstrations are happening right across the United States today to oppose the Trump administration. This movement is called the No Kings Movement.
So, now we can go back to the whole thing being about the series being restricted in the United States and all that stuff. The series' release couldn't be more coincidentally well-timed. So, as I said, the reason why the series wasn't able to air in the US was due to its strong anti-fascist message. But primarily, it was also due to its depiction of authoritarianism and the parallels it had with a lot of contemporary United States politics, with the main example being Mussolini's line of this.
Make Italy great again.
Obviously, that strikes very, very close to home for the Americans. The modern parallels the series had echoes many of the populist slogans, specifically parodying the Trump and MAGA era through certain lines and rhetoric. But when you look at the dates on when the series was released, and when like the United States elections happened and concluded to the inauguration, obviously it didn't really line up. Like, the final stages of production were already in, well, their final stages before like November 2024, which was when like the end of the election. And the series itself was released in September in the same year. But the cultural context of the rise of global populism and authoritarianism slash strongman rule made the series feel especially more powerful and more resonant for pretty much everyone across the world. In the end, the alignment of this whole timeline has made the series really, really powerful, especially when we look at what Trump is doing in concerns with immigration, the economy, social safety nets, the attacks on like the press, the media being attacked as well, electoral systems being attacked, the geopolitical realignments that Trump is initiating, and just many, many more horrid stuff that is also happening that really shouldn't be happening, really. Especially in a country that should be taking pride in being a multicultural one, considering how immigration built the grounds on which it is standing on today. A lot of the stuff that is shown in the series, again, shows how and why folks would fall for leaders such as Mussolini and or Trump. It's the usage of charisma, controlled media propaganda, and the Wolfpack mentality of their supporters. It may not be a repeat, obviously, but it is a re-echo and a rhyme of what happened in history. The author of the Dune books, Frank Herbert, famously said in these 3 quotes when it comes to leaders who have charisma. Beware of heroes, much better to rely on your own judgment and your own mistakes. When I am weaker than you, I ask you for freedom, because that is according to your principles. When I am stronger than you, I take away your freedom, because that is according to my principles. The most dangerous kind of leader is one who is charismatic, because people stop questioning him. And this is the unfortunate reality that we are currently in, especially to the Americans who are currently living through it. Arguably, this did not begin in like the start of Trump's second term. To me, this all started all the way back in 2016, where global democracy entered into essentially a recession. Of course, we see the beginning of the first term of Trump-era politics. But we also see the rise of right-wing nationalism in many parts of the world. Turkey had suffered a crackdown on many opposition movements, media, and in the academia after a failed coup. The Brexit vote in the UK was driven by anti-immigrant rhetoric and populist lies, which all sparked a chain reaction in other European countries like Poland and in Hungary. And just because it hits closer to home, or practically at home, here in the Philippines, we saw the rise of Rodrigo Duterte. And during his term, he conducted numerous extrajudicial killings during his war on drugs, and also ended up attacking numerous allies such as the West and the Vatican for some fucking reason. But also, he attacked a lot of his political opposition, and those, particularly in journalism, who opposed him. With the 2 most well-known cases being the arrest and imprisonment of former Secretary Justice Laila de Lima and journalist, Rappler CEO, and now Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Ressa. Obviously, this isn't mentioning a lot of the other actors who are also responsible for fanning the flames. People like Tommy Robinson in the UK, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, Alex Jones, just to name a few who are based in the United States, Jordan Peterson, and even fucking Andrew Tate. I don't know where the fuck he is now, but I pretty much know that he's practically irrelevant at this point, I hope. Not to mention the what and the whom I deem the most responsible in enabling these types of individuals, and that being social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and even here on YouTube, and also as far as Twitch. The year 2016 proved to us that the internet algorithms spread and amplify fake news more than factual news. All of this was before Elon Musk bought Twitter, before the so-called podcast bros became the mainstream alt-right, and before Trump made Truth Social, much like how Mussolini made his own newspaper way back in the day. The erosion of democracy is unfortunately still ongoing as of recording this video. Much like fascism, Christian nationalism, religious fundamentalism, populism, Euroscepticism, and even Zionism have been mobilized because people fell for the lies of these hateful orientated groups and people who believe in such hateful rhetoric that push the narratives that certain people groups or people who really just oppose them outright don't exist or don't deserve rights. So-called undesirables are the true problem, and it's purely because of the failures of the capitalist establishment. At the very beginning of the series, I showed you guys specifically the opening scene where it shows soldiers who had a lot of unhealed wounds after the First World War. In our current case, many of these people who fall for lies and hate, and specifically fell for the individuals who spread a lot of these hateful rhetoric, is because of the lack of proper care that is supposed to be granted to them in a prosperous economy. If social safety nets, public councils, and social health care weren't so underfunded or even faced the massive spending cuts that happened or that are currently happening, people wouldn't be so depressed about like everything that it turns them to hate everything. Not to mention the need for a proper minimum wage to live off of. There have been numerous studies conducted that showed us that high spending on social security and welfare can reduce the chances for people to fall into the far right pipeline, because these public spending policies can significantly improve mental health and social trust in people's government, where people can just focus on building their desired dream life they want to have with their families in their future, instead of just worrying day by day on how to pay off the mortgage. If we were to help combat a lot of these hateful rhetorics, such as fascism and populism, yes, we need to reform the economy and we have to reform the government. But we also need to ensure that the ideas and principles of democracy stay intact. To which I want to mention, once again, Maria Ressa. When Maria Ressa was finally released from prison and practically all major charges had been dropped, she released a book titled How to Stand Up to a Dictator. The main argument in her book is the importance of truth, because both truth and democracy are inseparable, and that disinformation through fake news, propaganda, and the trolling supporters is a dictator's most powerful weapon, especially in our age today where we are heavily glued to our screens. She touched on how authoritarianism starts to take over a country, and that is by weaponizing the lawfare and the judicial system and executive systems to bring down the opposition. Maria Ressa would use her own experiences of being hit with many fake, trumped up charges that led to her arrest, as well as her receiving death threats and a lot of hate online, which happened all under the Duterte administration. She would essentially conclude her book with the message that democracy requires constant act of defense, where she emphasizes that citizens cannot be idle. They cannot stay complicit, nor could they be passive observers in today's day and age, considering how social media is just a big part of our lives now. Ressa would make the points on what citizens in a democratic society must do. Defend independent journalism, demand accountability from tech companies and those who actively spread lies, and build movements that are based on courage and integrity. Thankfully, we do have many of those instances where people are going out of their way to do all of those things and support those who really do need it. And I'm not even talking about all of the most recent protests that have occurred in solidarity for immigrants, targeted public officials, and public figures, the LGBTQIA plus community, and the Palestinians. If we were to push back against the growing environment of hate, of populism, and ultranationalism, we have to continue these types of movements. Movements that are not only based on courage and integrity, but also based on solidarity and respect for those who are not only supportive, but also for those who have fallen for the lies and hate. Because in the end, many of these folks are sensible people and only voted the way they did because they felt alienated by the establishment. Which is why, very, very recently, we saw the victory of Zoran Mamdani against the established politicians like Andrew Cuomo. Having public servants who would fight and stand with these movements is important for us to ensure hateful rhetoric such as fascism, ultranationalism, populism, Zionism, you name it, won't spread any further. Now, I want to finish this long video off with a quote from Maria Ressa herself, when she talked about truth being inseparable from democracy.
3 sentences I've said repeatedly since 2016. If you don't have facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these 3, we have no shared reality. We can't solve any problems. We have no democracy. That's what social media has done. It has come in and used free speech to stifle free speech.
Anyways, I hope you guys really did enjoy this video. This is probably the longest video that I have ever made so far on my channel, and I am tired. I hope you guys enjoyed it in the end, and I hope that you guys understood my feelings and my thoughts, and just the place on where I'm coming from right now. Well, pretty much that's all for today. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Please leave a like, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave the comment down below. I'm so fucking tired, I'm so sorry. And share this with your friends, because why not? I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Fuck. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys in the next one.